Welcome back to Understanding Laudato Si. In this episode, we'll take a look at the first part of Chapter 3 of Pope Francis's encyclical. It's a chapter that's divided into 3 subsections, and in this episode, we'll take a look at the first 2 of those. Even though there are 3 subsections in this whole chapter, there are really 2 themes that Pope Francis addresses. The first 2 subsections, the first 2 parts, focus on the question of technology. And the last section, which we'll take a look at in the next episode, really deals with human responsibility and what Pope Francis identifies as pervasive anthropocentrism. Don't worry, we'll get to that soon enough. Pope Francis opens this chapter with a very succinct observation. He says that it's not very helpful at all to merely name the symptoms of the ecological crises that the world faces. Rather, we need to go more deeply into the human causes of the concerns that we face today. And this is something that here in the United States in particular, and in a few other places around the world, but especially here in the US, is a subject that becomes somewhat controversial. Pope Francis doesn't spend a whole lot of time, as I've mentioned in earlier episodes, addressing what is oftentimes depicted here in our culture as a climate change debate. Rather, Pope Francis acknowledges and affirms that this is not a question up to debate. Rather, it is a reality, and most of the scientists of the world agree that there is a human cause, human contributed factors that have led to the climate crises, the global climate change that we experience, and the detrimental effects that arise from that. And so the real debate, we might say, isn't whether or not there is global climate change and human causes that have contributed to it, but rather the real debate is, what should we do in response? The first section, or subsection of this chapter is titled Technology, Creativity, and Power. And here Pope Francis retraces the 200 years or so of rapid technological development in our culture, particularly in the global north, what we might recall as the Industrial Revolution, and subsequently everything that's happened really in the last 50 years and is happening as we speak right now, this rapid increase in technological and scientific advancement. So he rehearses this, and at first he says, there are a lot of things very good, very positive about our technological innovations. Echoing, in a sense, what Pope Benedict, his predecessor, has written about in his encyclicals and apostolic exhortations. Benedict said that technology, we might say, is in and of itself neither good nor bad. Rather, there's a context that we need to take into consideration. And if we're looking at technology and scientific discovery and advancement in a positive light, we might say that this is a good reflection, a clear indication of how we are using our gifts of intelligence and creativity. In fact, this is one of the many ways in which human beings can be what we call co-creators with God. And so technology has presented to the world and to human society in general a number of very positive things, what we might identify as moral goods. And Pope Francis names just a few in passing. He says medicine, for instance, and technology that deals with communication and travel, making it easier for human beings to connect with one another, as well as art. Art is something, and human expression of creativity. These are things that are goods. These are positive things that arise from technological development and advancement. And yet these discoveries, these technological advancements, bring some shadow sides, some dark sides. And Pope Francis has pointed out that if we look at the human population, all 6 billion people and more that inhabit this planet, relatively very few people actually have control over, access to, knowledge of, or reap the benefits, at least immediately, of this technology, of these scientific discoveries and advancement. And so what happens is there's an imbalance of power. Very few people, those who have access to these technologies, for instance, have tremendous power over the rest of the human population. We see that play out in our own time with news headlines about billionaires or multimillionaires or people who own various investment companies that invest in medicine or medical research and then patent or control those products and make it such that in order for them to gain a tremendous profit or to have a return on their investment, we might say in financial terms, they have to charge a tremendous amount of money, or they convince themselves that they have to. And as a result, few people are able to access life-saving technologies in medicine. And Pope Francis highlights instances like that as a sign of concern, something that we need to be aware of. He also says that there is, we might say, a naive association in our own age, particularly in this technological age in which we live, that there is a correlation, a direct relationship between increase in technology and research and information technologies and human progress. There's a kind of presumption that's in the ethos of our culture that the more we're able to do in terms of technology, the better off the human family or human persons will be collectively. And Pope Francis really wants to caution against that. He draws on a number of theologians as well as his predecessors, several popes in their teaching, to point out that this is not exactly the case. And if one needs any kind of evidence of this, Pope Francis points to World War II. If you look at the battles that were taking place in the Pacific or over in Europe, Pope Francis says that technology, actually in this idea of human progress being correlative, are actually debunked. That all you have to do is think about atomic bombs being dropped in Japan. All one has to do is think about the efficiency and the technology and ease with which horrible atrocities took place in concentration camps perpetuated by fascists, by Nazis, in an attempt to murder millions of people. In a sense, technology brings with it wonderful potential and lots to offer us, but it also brings with us a great deal of threat to human beings as well as the rest of creation. The second subsection is titled The Globalization of the Technocratic Paradigm. And what Pope Francis is getting at here is the way in which a new culture, a new sensibility has really pervaded the whole world and the human family these days in light of these technological advances and the primacy that people place on technology and development and scientific research and so on. And he says that human beings throughout history have always, in a sense, intervened in nature. But he suggests that what has happened, particularly in the last century, is a shift away from human cooperation with the rest of creation, that we, while we intervened in terms of agriculture or hunting, gathering, these sorts of things, where we acknowledge and interact with our environment and the other aspects of creation in which we share this common home that is planet Earth, on their terms and on our terms in some sort of way that appeared to acknowledge the dynamics of the created order. Pope Francis says this has changed in a dramatic way, especially in our own time. It's increasingly so, where we no longer engage as subjects with the rest of creation in this kind of relationship of acknowledgement and connection, but rather we engage with creation as an object and treat the planet, treat animals, treat plant life, treat minerals, treat the earth itself as a resource to be cultivated, to be drawn from, and to serve our immediate gratification, to serve our immediate needs and desires. What this has resulted in is a confrontational or competitive way of thinking in terms of humanity versus the rest of the created world, but also humanity with itself, among itself, in the way that we relate to one another as human beings in this family of our own species. As a result, Pope Francis says that this attitude has really limited our freedom to be what it is God created us to be, the freedom to interact with one another and the rest of creation in the way that God intends. And as a result, not only have we then objectified the created order and have put too much emphasis on technology and what we can gain from the so-called resources of this planet, but in the process, this technocratic paradigm, this way of thinking that prioritizes and centralizes technology and discovery in this sort of way, this has in fact instrumentalized us, that we then become instruments. We become only valuable according to what we can provide one another, and that has led to some very serious problems. One of the biggest problems that has arisen from this way of thinking, this shift, is the way in which value, as I've mentioned already, is placed on individuals, human beings, but also other non-human aspects of creation according to what that person, that thing, that object, that animal, that plant can provide me in terms of profit. And this is really not a good way of thinking, because what it does is it separates any sort of moral responsibility or ethical reflection from our exchanges in economy, the way we relate to one another, our ways of viewing finance, the way we view international relations, and the way we view our relationships to one another and the rest of creation. Pope Francis says that technology in and of itself, as well as the market, because we hear both of these sort of proposals or presentations, hypotheses presented, that these things, if we put enough research and energy and time and resources into technology, or if we let the market sort things out, then the environment will be taken care of. We can solve the problems that we're currently facing, or that we might soon face in greater degree, as well as if we let the market play itself out, then those who are poor globally or in our local regional areas, well, then they'll be taken care of, that somehow it will all work out. And Pope Francis says that is not the way this works, that we can't technologize our way out of this. We can't sort of consume in terms of financial spending our way out of global poverty. Instead, we need to shift our whole perspectives. We need to move away from placing all of our trust in sort of an idolatrous way into our technologies or into our individual profits and benevolence. Instead, he says we need to think more on the global scale, more on the communal scale, more on a relational scale. One of the things that Pope Francis highlights as related to or contributing to this way of thinking, this paradigm, is the way that we understand how we know things. In other words, what philosophers would call a shift in our epistemology, how we come to know anything, really. It's about knowledge, the study of knowledge. And in this case, the shift is away from an appreciation for broad, general knowledge to a siloing or a very narrow perspective of what's important to know and what's important to focus on and what's important to learn. And on the one hand, Pope Francis says, specializing, being a specialist, being very knowledgeable in one particular area is beneficial to that study, to that particular area of research or of production, that area of discovery, that area of investment. That's fine. He says you can see the results of that. Yet on the other hand, this siloing of information has fragmented, has fractured our way of knowing the whole, knowing the bigger picture, knowing how, in other words, we interrelate with one another. It has allowed us to think of ourselves first and foremost, whether we're conscious of it or not, and to not be that aware of how we are connected to one another. And this is a real problem, the siloing of information. In the end, Pope Francis says we need to shift our culture, we need to shift our paradigms, and not sort of band-aid all the individual problems that we encounter in terms of the environment, in terms of ecological crises. And instead, we need to have a whole communal paradigm shift. The language that Pope Francis uses is that we need to broaden our vision. We need to return to a better sense of the whole, which is in truth what the word Catholicism means, or Catholic, which is whole-making, or throughout the whole. Instead of focusing on the particular, the narrow, our own little world, our own little kind of reality, our own experience or needs or desires, to think of everybody or the whole community together. And Pope Francis concludes this section with a very telling phrase in which he says that nobody is calling for us to return to the Stone Age. He's not a Luddite. He's not somebody who is afraid of technology or thinks that it's a problem in and of itself. Rather, what he says is we need to slow down, to take a better look with an ethical lens, with a sense of broader community and interrelationship. We need to look at reality in a new way and move forward with a new worldview. As always, I want to thank you for watching this video and encourage you to subscribe, to like the video, to post your comments, questions, suggestions below, and share this video with others. As always, may the Lord give you peace.